Hi everyone, thanks for joining me for this story writing session brought to you by the Georges River Libraries. My name is Erin Gough, I'm an author. I've written two books which I'll show to you now. The first one is The Flywheel. The second one is Amelia Westlake. This is my most recent book. It's really great to be here. Today we are going to be talking about writing good stories. One of my favourite topics, and particularly we're going to be focusing on writing good characters. Now, why are we focusing on characters? Because in my opinion, good characters are the beating heart of any good story. If a reader likes the character and is interested in what happens to them, then they're going to keep reading. So what do you need for this story writing workshop? Well, two very important items: a piece of paper, at least one A4 sheet, possibly two or three actually. I mean, if you've got two or three handy, go and get two or three, and a pen that works. Very important that it works. I will sit here quietly while you go and retrieve those items. Actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to ask you to pause the video, go and get the items, and I promise I'll be here when you get back. All right, good, let's get started then. Okay, we've got three things that we're going to look at specifically. Characters I've mentioned, but another very important part of writing characters that I want to spend a bit of time focusing on is the question of voice. And I'm not talking about singing voice, although you might decide that your character is indeed a very good singer. I'm talking about how to make your character come alive through what they say, what they choose to talk about, and how they say it. They're elements of voice, and we're going to explore that in a little bit of detail in a minute. The third thing that we're going to talk about, so that you can really get cracking and you have everything that you need to make this the best story in the universe, is story elements. So all of the other elements, apart from character, that go into making a good story. Okay, so to begin with character, I want you to think about your favourite character. So you might not read very much, or you might hate all of the characters that you read about. So you're not going to choose a character that you read in a book, but obviously you can if you want. If you don't want to, you can choose a character to think about right now that is from like a TV show that you enjoy or a film that you've seen quite recently. Just have a think about it and have a think about what it is that you like about that character. The reason I'm asking you to do this is because I think if there are really good characters in a story, they're the thing, they're the clincher. That's what makes you want to keep reading. So I can think of two really amazing characters that I'm enjoying at the moment. I'm reading the Book of Dust, which is kind of the next in the Northern Lights trilogy by Philip Pullman. Some of you might be familiar with. There's a really strong character at the centre of those novels called Lyra Belacqua, who is incredibly compelling to read about. The other thing that I'm watching at the moment is a show called Killing Eve, which is about a psychopathic murderess. And her name is Villanelle, and she is hilarious as well as deadly. So I'm very much enjoying her character as the centre of a television show. Okay, so what makes a really good character? How can you create somebody as compelling as these characters, or whoever you've chosen as your favourite character? I'm going to turn the page and tell you. This is the answer. Each character, and I'm pretty much saying this without exception, I don't care who has written them, if they're good, they've got all of these things, okay? They've got a name, preferably a name that is memorable and representative of them as a character. They have specific traits that set them apart from other people, and very importantly, from other people within the same story. There's nothing worse than reading a story where all the characters kind of blur into one and you're like, who are these people? I don't know whether we're talking about this person now or whether we're talking about this person now. You need to try and make your characters distinguishable from the other characters in the book, most of all. They have to, well, they've got to look like something. I mean, most of us look like something. So try to come up with something fun, something unique, perhaps, for a character. That always helps. They have special skills. Now, in a supervillain story, superhero story, for example, a special skill might be, X-ray vision, right? But if you're not writing a superhero story, you're writing kind of like an historical drama, X-ray vision might not cut it for a special skill. It might be something more like they're really good at making soup. Whatever, it doesn't matter what it is. It should fit with the story, it should fit with the character, but it's important to think about what is special about that particular character and what can they do that perhaps other people can't do. Flaws. Now, I actually think the flaws of a character are the most important part of writing characters. And I say that because a bit like really perfect people in real life, well, first of all, perfect people don't exist. They're a fantasy. We're all flawed. So to create a realistic character, you need to create flaws. But also, I would emphasize that more importantly than that, a character without flaws is boring. Nobody cares. They're really dull. So have some really good flaws. Have some deep-seated, psychological, just can't get it together, this character. You've got to do something. You'll find, actually, that's the other thing, people feel affectionate towards other people's flaws. People actually, and look, this might feel weird to say it, but if somebody falls in love with you, they tend to fall in love with what's wrong with you. That's my experience anyway. Just as well, I've got so much wrong with me. It's my saving grace. Goal. Everyone needs a goal. We want to know what the characters want to achieve in their life. And the other thing that's really important is we want to know what they fear. What's stopping them from achieving their goal? This is how you create a three-dimensional and complex character. It's actually quite simple if you can manage to get this combination of factors right. And best of all, when they start resonating off each other. Okay, so to demonstrate how you do this, before I'm going to get you to do it yourself, because that's going to be the next thing, but I'm going to describe a character that everyone will be fairly familiar with. It might not be your favourite character, but this is somebody that I imagine all of you have some level of familiarity with, so we can discuss it here today for everybody to understand. And that character has the name of, drumroll please, Ron Weasley. So Ron Weasley, he's like Harry Potter's best mate, one of his best mates. Great name for a character. What's great about this character name? It is distinctive, but it's also kind of an ordinary common man type of name. And I think Ron is that person. He is from a large, not particularly well-off family, and he's got that kind of name. He doesn't have a posh name. He has kind of a commoner's name, and it's short and sharp. His first name's short and sharp. You see, it's Weasley. It seems a little bit silly. Wheeze, you think of wheeze as in sneezing and that kind of thing. And there is something comically bumbly about the character of Ron. So all of these things mean that this works really well as a name for a character. So think about what your character's name is and how it's representative of who your character is, what it says about your character. Okay, what are Ron's traits? All right, well, I can think of a couple of traits for Ron. He is funny, and he is, as I've mentioned, from a large family. does he look like? He has red hair. That's something that is very distinctive about him. He's tall and thin. And he wears, what kind of clothes does he wear? He wears hand-me-downs. So we're already seeing these types of traits and these types of characteristics resonating against each other. We have Ron Weasley, which is kind of a funny, bumbly commoner's name, emphasised by who the person is. So he's comic, he's from a large family, he's got that kind of class, he's lower, on the middle to lower class rung of society. Then his look, he's got his red hair, he's tall and thin, he wears hand-me-downs. So that resonates against what we already know about who he is and where he comes from in society. What are Ron's special skills? Well, a huge special skill of Ron's, which is very endearing, is his loyalty. He's very loyal to his friends. He looks out for them when he can. And that's an incredibly endearing skill to have. It might not be as good as X-ray vision, but not everyone can be Superman. What about his flaws? He has a lot of flaws. And actually, I would argue that that makes him a very endearing character. So he's not a great student. Not, for example, compared to Hermione, who is a very good student. He's not even good at sport. Not good at magic, really, either. And also, let's face it, he can be insensitive. He can also be quite immature. Yeah. He's called out for all of this stuff throughout the book. Deeply flawed. Love it. What is his goal? Well, I think because he is so flawed and he is not particularly good at anything, he wants to prove himself. He's got something to prove, which is, I think, part of what makes him strive so hard when he is in those situations in the book, which are very dangerous. He really comes through with the goods. And his fear resonates against this. He feels like he will never be as good as those around him. So this is a barrier for him. It sometimes stops him achieving what he should. So this is Ron. Now it's your turn. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to pause this video, and I'm going to have a cough just off screen, feeling a bit twitchy in the throat. And you're going to create a character of your own. 5 minutes. If you haven't paused the video, do it now. 5 minutes. I'm just waiting for those of you who've forgotten to press pause to pause it now, while I prepare for the next part of our writing workshop. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had fun with your character. I imagine that you have a fully formed three-dimensional character written down on a page right now. I wish that we had a system at this point where I could hear some of the things you've come up with, because I always enjoy hearing about people's characters, and particularly the names that people come up with, because there is always a lot of creativity out there around names. Now we're going to look at the element of voice. Okay, so what does voice mean? I've mentioned it earlier. It means two things, I think. It means what your characters choose to say, and secondly, how they say it. So, this is something that is very important to really honing and bedding down those characteristics that we've already talked about. Now, as I mentioned, I think, I'm going to talk a little bit about the two characters that I created for my book, Amelia Westlake. One of the features of this book is that it's about two very different girls. And in fact, I've written the book so that one chapter is told from one perspective and the next chapter is told from the next perspective, and they alternate. So those two girls are, first of all, Harriet Price, who is a rule-abiding prefect type. She's very preppy, she's very proper, very optimistic, very, she plays by the rules, quite conservative. And then on the other hand, you have Will Everhart. Now, Will is a rule-breaking slacker. She very much is anti-authoritarian, and strangely, during the book, the two of them strike up an unlikely friendship when they decide to publish a controversial cartoon about a sexist teacher in the school newspaper. And they published that cartoon under the pseudonym Amelia Westlake, hence the name of the book. And that just is the beginning of a whole series of pranks that they end up conducting under the name Amelia Westlake. That's what the book is about. Now, one of my aims with this book was that if you open the page, any page, and read a sentence or two, you would immediately know which of the characters, Will or Harriet, you were reading. And the reason that I wanted to do that was because I wanted to emphasize how different they were. And how did I do that? I focused on these things. I focused on what they chose to say and how they said it. So let's have a look first of all at who these characters are in terms of their traits. So Will Everhart, she's the rule-breaking slacker. She is cynical, pessimistic, very candid, always has foot-in-mouth disease, just says what she thinks. Be damned what anybody thinks of what she says. She'll say it anyway. She's very individualistic in her look. She has, cool haircut, leather jacket, never wears her school uniform properly, because why would you do that? That's for losers. Her special skill is she's a bit of a social justice warrior. So she's very good at seeing injustices around her and calling them out, which is a fantastic skill to have. And actually, often people who have that skill are also flawed in those ways that we're going to talk about. She's very critical, hypercritical of others, which is not particularly attractive. She can be very rude because it's more important for her to call out the truth of a situation than to be all polite about it. Her goal is to stand up for what is right, and her fear, well, it's that she will never be loved. I mean, that's her deep-seated fear. It's not something that is ever said in the book. I never say that explicitly, but that's one of the things that is driving her, because I think that's one of the things that's driving all of us. Let's have a look at Harriet. Oh, actually, we're not going to look at Harriet yet. We're going to talk about voice. We're going to talk about how I chose what Will would say and how she'd say it in terms of this, in terms of these things. So actually, what I think I'll do first of all is I'll read you a short paragraph from Will's story, and you'll get a sense of who she is and what I did with her voice. I've been thinking a lot lately about hoaxes. My life, for instance. Lately it feels less like a life and more like a joke. Somebody's practical joke. Don't get me wrong, it's nothing I can't handle. Terrible stuff has been happening to me since I was born. Mum and Dad named me Wilhelmina for a start. I've had 3 pets hit by cars. Last winter I was mildly electrocuted by a faulty hairdryer. Then there are the elements that make up my daily slog. Having separated parents on different sides of the country. living in a shoebox beneath a flight path, going to a school full of rich, selfish brats. So that's Will's voice, okay? So what was I thinking about when I was writing passages from her perspective? Okay, what Will chooses to say. So you'll hear from that passage that very much she's a pessimist. So she's always complaining. She's very negative. And she's always complaining about injustices, often those committed against herself. Things aren't fair. Life is not fair. And she also has a sense of social inequalities. She's talking about rich brats at her school. So she talks about her rich, selfish brat schoolmates. Now, how does she say this? All right. So her language was something that I thought very closely about when I was writing it. Because she is anti-authoritarian, she doesn't really follow the rules of grammar. She uses a lot of slang. She also swears a lot because that's the kind of person she is. She says things with short words and very concisely. And basically that's the approach that I took to Will. So as you can see, it's really important that the way that your character speaks and the things that they choose to speak about reflect the characteristics that we've already talked about. Okay, now, Harriet Price. Okay, so we've talked a bit about Harriet. Effectively, Harriet is the opposite of Will. So it makes it fairly easy to identify those differences. Now, I'll mention that I called her Harriet Price because she's rich. So I thought it would be fun to have a name that referenced her money. It's also a very white Protestant type of name, and that's her character as well. She's a white Protestant. Okay, her traits. She is naive. Unlike Will, who is very worldly wise, Harriet Price is naive. She's optimistic as opposed to pessimistic. She toes the line. She does what she's told. And of course, you can see this reflected in the way that she looks. She's very prim and proper. She stands up straight. Her hair is very neat. She is conventionally attractive and very conservative looking. Kind of boring, but a lot of people into that. Okay, special skill. She's clever. She's very clever. She's smart. She's good at school. Will's clever as well. The other thing about her is that even though she is naive and she sometimes gets it wrong and she's unaware of her own privilege, she's ultimately a kind-hearted person. She cares about other people. She's just not necessarily very good at showing it all the time. Her flaw is that she sees the best in everyone. But actually, I think I'd probably add to that, looking at that now, is her naivety as well, and her fact that she does lack awareness of what might be going on for other people, which is difficult if she wants to be kind-hearted to people. So she has a bit to learn. Her goal is to stand up for what's right. Her fear is that she'll stand out and that she won't succeed in the very strict goals that she has planned for herself. Okay, so here is a taste of Harriet's voice. I adore my modern history class. It is one of the absolute highlights of my week. Today's class is especially wonderful because we're discussing defining moments. History is about turning points, Miss Bracken explains. I want each of you to share with us one big event that has influenced your life. We go around the room. When I learnt to read, says Eileen Sarmiento. When I got my platinum credit card, says Millie. My first ski trip to Aspen, says Beth. Then it is my turn. In all honesty, my defining moment was when I first set foot on the grounds of Rosemead Grammar. A few loud groans and sick noises come from predictable corners. Apparently it is in vogue to be critical of this school and the opportunities we have as students here. I think this is basically a very ungrateful attitude given the fees our parents pay, especially since not everyone's parents are lucky enough to be mouth surgeons like both of mine are. Okay, so what can we say about Harriet's voice? What Harriet chooses to say? Well, because she's an optimist, she talks about how great her life is. And how does she say all of these wonderful things about her terrific life? She speaks very properly. So she uses big words. She doesn't use conjunctions, you might notice. She doesn't say wasn't and isn't. She says was not and is not. And she also uses a lot of, I guess, flowery language. She uses a lot of adjectives and a lot of adverbs, you know, actually and basically, meaningless words that she doesn't need, just to make it sound posh and important. Okay, so that's Harriet and her voice. So now that you've gotten a bit of sense about what I mean by voice, I would like you to spend 5 minutes writing a couple of passages from your character's perspective. So think about what your character chooses to say, and then think about how they're going to say it. And think about how those two elements are representing what their character traits are. Okay, 5 minutes. And you can just pause, obviously. I'm going to be here the whole time. 5 minutes. Maybe I'll just go to the side for a tick. Won't be long. Welcome back. Well, I don't know about you, but that 5 minutes went very fast for me. We're now on to the third and final portion of our workshop today. And what I want to talk fairly briefly about is the other elements of a story. Not because I don't think they're all equally important, but because we've spent a bit of time on character now. And character is the best element of a story, the most important element of a story. And you guys already have your character now, so you're sorted. But just, you know, so we can round things off nicely, I'm going to talk you very briefly through the other elements of a story. We're going to do this like a bit of a brainstorm. I think there's some kind of leaf blower happening outside now, so I hope you can't hear that too much. We're going to talk about the other elements of a story very quickly, other than character. And so I want you to try and think of them as in your head. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. Just think of them in your head and listen to the leaf blower that's outside my window. And then I'll write the ones down that I can think about, and you can see how many you got right. Okay. You thinking of some? Okay. Oh, yep. Got another one. Okay. All right. Now look, there are a lot of things that go into making a story, but let's talk very briefly about these points. Now, I'm hoping that everybody came up with plot. Plot is an important part of storytelling. Even if you feel like your story doesn't have a plot, it does have a plot. It's got to have a plot. And if it doesn't have these elements of a plot, you're going to leave your readers hanging, and that's no good at all. So we've got to start with the situation. And then we've got to complicate things, okay? And resolve them somehow. It's really important that you've got effectively a beginning, a middle, and an end. Don't leave your reader hanging. Tone, this is something to think about. I guess the most obvious examples of tone are things like, is your story a light-hearted comedy? Is it a satire? Is it funny? Or is it a drama? Is it tragedy? Now remember, you can actually get away with both sometimes. You can have a dramedy. Dramedy is some of my favourite types of stories, as a matter of fact. Things that deal with serious topics, but use humour to explore those topics. Even some of Shakespeare's greatest tragedies have those comic relief characters that you see in the middle of the stories that provide the light and the dark. Well, the light in between the dark. So that's really, you can think about that as well. Another thing to think about, of course, is setting. Now, I'm not saying you need vast descriptions of hillsides and oceans and mountains and sunsets and that kind of thing, but it's important that you have a setting for your story that the action can take place. So think very carefully about it and have a lot of fun with it as well, because once you have a setting, you can populate your world with different features, which can be very fun indeed. My book was set in a posh high school, girls' school, and I had a lot of fun talking about all of the features of posh high schools, like Olympic-sized swimming pools and orchestra pits and that kind of thing. So you can have a lot of fun with setting if you think about it right. All right, well look, I'd like you now to spend another 5 minutes thinking about those elements of your story, and then you will have basically everything that you need for your story. So I'm going to go, I'm going to leave you to it. I hope that this has been useful and a little bit of fun. Good luck with your story writing, and all the best. It's been fun hanging out. Bye-bye.